Good afternoon. This is Mr. Neely. I will be going over the elements of plot, or some might call it the elements of fiction. Um, we have gone over this whether you're in Miss Hooker's class, Miss Smith, Mr. Pedrosa, myself. We've gone over this in seventh grade since the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, since you're in seventh grade, you're going to see a lot of this in eighth grade. Um, I'm going to go over the different types of elements that make up the plot diagram, just basic stuff you should know by now. This should help you in your blend course. So here you go. Okay. The first thing I want to go over is what is plot. Basically, plot are basically the events that make up a story. Every single story has a, believe it or not, most of the time has a specific formula. That it's the same thing in most stories. And I'm going to give you plenty of examples as throughout this presentation. But plot is the events in the story. It's the formula that makes up that story. Usually in that story, there are conflicts and problems, and we go through the same stages from beginning to end. Okay, so let's just test your knowledge a little bit. I'm going to go step by step. You guys know what this is. You guys should be able to identify this by now. Next year, when you are in eighth grade, it's going to be more or less the same thing, but a little bit more extensive. Whether if you're in Mr. Jackson or Miss Mendoza or Mrs. Neely's class, either way, it's the same thing, but a little bit more intense. Now, there are 5 stages in the plot diagram. Let's start with the first one. Does anyone know what the first one is called? Okay, there it is. Pretty simple. The exposition. The exposition basically sets everything up. We find out who our characters are, our setting, and even, I know it doesn't say there, but even our conflict is usually given to the reader or its audience by this time. It's the very beginning. So if I were hashtagging this, I'd probably put somewhere there hashtag beginning. We are given everything, the information we need to kind of to know what is important for through the rest of the way. It's setting all the pieces up. So I'm going to use many movies as an example. The simple movies like The Lion King. In the beginning, we are told who Simba is, Mufasa, Scar. Those are our characters. And then the setting is obviously introduced. It's Pride Rock. Then the characters are go through a little bit of dialogue, and we know that the conflict is that Scar is jealous of Mufasa and wants to be king. That's what the exposition is. Where it's all of our pieces are being put into place. Another example is Toy Story, the very first Toy Story. The setting, it takes place in Andy's room. We get to know who Rex is, Woody, Bo Peep, and then as we get as the movie goes along further, we find out that the main problem, the conflict of the story, is that Woody is jealous of Buzz and needs to learn to get along with him. So the first part is intended to set everything up. It's the beginning of the story. Then we go to the rising action. Usually by then, well, the way I've told my class this is that by then we should know what our conflict is. And if you know the pattern, you can see the pattern right here. It's increasing. Something is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. Show it right here. I should put this right here. The conflict begins to build. The rising action is more or less the middle of the story, where the conflict gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I mentioned in the last slide, in The Lion King, where Scar is jealous of Mufasa. Well, what does he do? He kills Mufasa. He hires hyenas to kill him, and he more or less forces Simba to leave his home. In Toy Story, I mentioned that the conflict was Woody was jealous of Buzz. Uh, the conflict gets bigger and bigger. Buzz accidentally knocks Buzz out of the Woody accidentally knocks out Buzz out of the window, and he is forced. and he's forced out of Annie's room, and they end up in the next door neighbor's his house. Basically, the whole point of the rising action is to build the plot. The conflict begins to get bigger and bigger. It begins to unfold. Okay, as it says right there. Um, and this is very important because the more you build the conflict, the higher the stakes get as the story goes along. Okay. And of course, our climax. This is often called the turning point, as you can see right here. This is often called the turning point of the story. It's basically, usually, this is the greatest uh, point of interest in the story. Usually, this is the most intense part of the story. This is the big bang, the big fight at the very end. This is where Simba finally decides to confront Scar and fight him. This is where Woody realizes he's done wrong by Buzz and he tries to save his life. And he goes through a car chase scene to kind of help his friend. And usually, more or less, what happens with the conflict usually is predicated of what happens in the climax. It's single-handedly the most. I usually like if you've seen the Fast and the Furious movies, it's usually the big car chase at the very end, the big fight, the final fight. So I would probably put in my hashtag here, hashtag intense. Okay. Now, on after the climax, if you notice most stories, they begin to loosen up on the drama. They don't just end the story right there. They have to kind of tie everything up before we get to our very end. The Lion King does it very quickly, but it's there. Rainfall comes down at the very end after the final fight between Simba and Scar and washes all of the filth from Scar's regime. In Toy Story, uh, Woody and Buzz are making jokes in Andy's room. They're tying everything up. It's showing that they're friends now. By then, hopefully, the conflict is resolved. What I would put here as my hashtag mellowing out. Everything is slowly calming down. Hashtag calming down. Everything is leading up to the finale at the very end. You can even feel that things are settling down here. And of course, our resolution, the hashtag end. This is where the story comes to an end. But most stories, not all of them, that's very important to understand. Not all stories have the conflict is resolved, but most stories, the conflict is resolved, and we have our ending. So again, I put one more time hashtag ending. Uh, this is the final piece of the plot diagram. Uh, by then, our character would have gone through his or her journey. And usually, by the very end, the character might have learned something. And I'll get to that as the PowerPoint goes on. But there is a lesson to be learned at the very end in the resolution. Okay? I included this because, I think it's important. You're not going to be tested on it, but I think it's important to know the types of characters in a story. Dynamic characters are basically characters that change over time. Uh, for instance, and if you look up right here, the examples I have, one of them in the left is Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games. Katniss is not the same person who she was at the very beginning. She's more, uh, she's she's able to take care of herself more. She's a bit stronger. Um, Another example would be Harry Potter, and the Harry Potter movies or the Harry Potter books. Harry, when you meet him at 11, and Harry at 17 at the very last story, he is not the same character. By the end, he is stronger. He's able to make tougher decisions. He's more of a man than he is a boy by the very end. These are characters that change over time. They learn a lesson, and because of that, those lessons learned in the plot diagram, in the story, uh, they've changed. Okay, there's even the Grinch right there. The Grinch is not the same character at the very end. He's learned his lesson. A static character is more or less the opposite. A static character is one that, more or less they stay the same. My friend Squidward right there. Squidward is going to be Squidward no matter what happens. Yes, there are moments in the episodes where he's a little bit nicer, but more or less he's the same guy. Uh, Dumbledore, he's the same guy. They do not change over the story. Dynamic characters change. Static hashtag not change. They do not change over time. They're more or less the same. I know all of your teachers have gone over this, but I want to go over it real quick. You should be able to identify and understand what the difference between a protagonist and an antagonist. The protagonist is the hero of the story. It's the good guy, the good girl. The antagonists are usually your villains. So your protagonists, I'll go start with the one on the right, the example right here. The protagonist is Harry. He's the good person. He's the hero. The antagonist is Voldemort. Okay? The protagonist here, Batman is the hero, of course. And Batman has many antagonists, but in this example, it's the Joker. You can do Bane. You can even do Superman because he's been Batman's antagonist in some movies. This one's a little bit difficult, not difficult, kind of confusing. I don't really like this example, but these are both protagonists. They're both heroes of the story. You could make a case that Woody is more of the antagonist in the first one because he's kind of being a jerk to Buzz the entire movie. But I would say that these are both the heroes in the Toy Story franchise. Okay. Now, like with every character, as I've mentioned before, goes through conflicts. Conflicts are what I would call problems. That's your hashtag problem. The character has to go through conflicts to change or to where they are presented with conflicts, and most of the time when they go through conflicts, they either change over time or the conflict is not resolved. Okay, now I'm going to go over different types of conflicts here. Okay, we've gone through some of these in class. I know it says 5, but I deleted the 5th one. I'm only going to stick with 4 because I don't want to make this PowerPoint too long. This is person versus person. This is when man versus man. This is when usually one character is going up against another character. It's kind of like the Harry versus Voldemort, Batman versus Joker. Person versus society. This is one person going up against the law. I'll give you an example about that right now. Person versus nature. We're kind of going through that right now, where nature is the problem with the COVID-19 is when one person is going up against natural forces, where basically natural forces are causing the issues towards mankind or individuals in the story. And of course, person versus self. This is when a person has to make a decision. I'm going to go through each of these and give you a good example. The first one, man versus nature. This is, of course, Jurassic Park. This is where the dinosaurs are the problem in all Jurassic Park movies. There's Jeff Goldblum running away from the T-Rex. Again, I should have used what we're going through right now because it's an excellent example where mankind versus COVID-19. That's a perfect description of man versus nature. Nature is the problem right now. We are waiting for it to slow down. We're waiting for resolve. So again, here's an example. It's man versus nature. Okay. Man versus self. This is typically when we're trying to make a decision. So I would put right there hashtag decision, making a decision. There's the good angel. There's the little devil. So we usually have to make several important decisions in life. That's man versus self. This is when the characters have to make important uh, life-changing decisions, and usually it's an internal battle the character is facing, and those are very important. I'll give you some examples. One example would be deciding to cut class. That'd be one. Another one would be doing drugs or not, or simple um, listening to your parents. All these are examples of making decisions. That's man versus self. Okay? Hopefully, you are listening to your good angel more than your bad angel, or little devil, I should say. And you knew I had to throw it in there. Man versus man. This is one character versus another character. There's your Star Wars reference. There's Anakin versus Obi-Wan Kenobi. Darth Vader versus Obi-Wan Kenobi. Most of you don't know him as Darth Vader, but this is Darth Vader. This is one character versus another character. But this is not just, it's I don't want you to confuse it as, this is something you only see in movies. No, some of you go through this in life too. Whether you have problems with another person, it could be student versus teacher, daughter versus parent. When I say man right here, that means mankind. Um, these two examples are examples of man versus man, where another person, if you're the protagonist and another person is the obstacle, that's a perfect example of man versus man. Okay, I just had to throw in that Star Wars reference. And of course, man versus society. This is usually the one that kids get confused with a lot. Basically, what don't make this harder than what it is. This is when a group of people, or it could even be one person. I'll give you an example of both right now. When one person or a group of people go up against a community or society. This picture right here shows a group of people, African Americans, protesting separation laws through peaceful marches. Uh, they're going up against racism, these group of protesters. That's man versus society. Most recently, the famous football player Colin Kaepernick, he was one person. He started a movement, and he was kneeling during the national anthem, and because he was protesting gun violence against African American citizens. That's man versus society. It's when one person or a small group of people go up against a large community, a set of rules. So it'd be like five of you going up against our uniform policy. That's man versus society. I would put right here um, hashtag against the rules. That's a good one. Is you're going up against the specific rules set by society or the community. And right here, um, the last thing I'm going to talk about is theme. Those of you who have me in your class, you know this word by heart. We see this word in every single thing um, we talk about in class, whether it's poetry, nonfiction, fiction, everything. We always try to find the theme, the central idea, or what I tell my kids to remember theme as the message of the story. Basically, don't make this word. This is what the star will use the word theme. Don't get this confused. This is not hard at all. This is basically, what did we learn in the story? What was the message of the story? That's it. So and here's the thing, theme is in everything we do. Theme, get rid of this right here. Theme can be found in poetry. It can be found in the music you listen to. It can be found in some of the videos you see. You can learn from almost anything. So the example I've chosen are, I've picked three different things, but check it out. There's B Rabbit from the movie 8 Mile. You don't know who B Rabbit is? That's Eminem from the movie 8 Mile. Aladdin, old school cartoon. The new one works as well. It's the same thing. And then there is the head protagonist from Frozen 2. I think her name's Elsa. I'm pretty sure her name is Elsa. I've been watching Frozen 2 since we've been on break because my daughters love this movie. So all three of these characters have one thing in common. They learn the same thing. They are three, like, these characters couldn't be any more different, but the theme is absolutely the same from the beginning, the exposition, to the very end. They learn to accept who you are and where you come from. And that's a perfect example. That's the message of all three of these films. And they couldn't be any more different. So going back to what I said earlier, how theme is universal, it absolutely is. If you listen to Kendrick Lamar, he has intense themes about equality. J. Cole talks about poverty. Uh, there are different themes and different types of media that you all listen to. So theme is universal. And let me go back right here. And by the resolution, the end of the story, we should have more or less an understanding what the story was trying to teach us. And our characters change throughout as they're learning this lesson because of the conflicts they are going through. Okay? So hopefully that was a nice little kind of, that's basically a nice summary of seventh grade reading. This is something you guys can keep and use in your resources and blend. I hope that helps you all. Oh, I know all your teachers are worried about you. Please, please, please finish your blend courses. And more importantly, please continue to to practice social distancing. Please stay safe. We want to see your beautiful faces this fall semester coming up. Okay. Thank you.